All right, so if you're new here, we take this part of this service, we call the message or teaching, and we typically group it together in what we call a series under some common idea. And this week we're starting a brand new series, so if you're new, it's a great week to be with us. But before I get into the details of that series, I'll share a little fun family fact. Does anyone keep their wallet in their back pocket? Anybody? Yeah, so my grandfather, he's passed away, but I've been told that he had a dent in his backside because for years, he kept this huge, thick, fat wallet in his back pocket, and he would sit on it all day long. And eventually, it shaped him, right? Anyone watch tennis, professional tennis, right? All right. If you look at some tennis players, especially professionals, people that are playing tennis all the time, all year round, all day long, if you look at their strong arm, right, like people like Rafael Nadal, if you look at his strong arm, it is so much bigger than his weak arm. It's unbelievable. Once you see it, you can't not see it, right? Look for this with tennis players. The game, it shapes them. It forms them. I like to write on an iPad. I do a lot of my writing on an iPad. I don't have to keep track of paper, and it's great. You can store it, you can erase it, whatever. I often, if I'm reading a book, like a real one with pages or a magazine or a newspaper or whatever, often I'll look at something and I will feel myself try to pinch to zoom. You know, like I don't actually ever get to the paper, but I have that like reflex, like, what does that say? And I can't do it, right? It's because of the smartphones and the tablets. And like that is beginning to form me. It's beginning to shape me. I was told after the first service today that a lot of teenagers now are developing a bump in their pinky finger right about here because of the way that they hold a smartphone. It's forming us. Fascinating. The question that I want to start out with, really to kick this series off, and the question I'd love for you to have on your mind for the next several weeks is, what's forming you? I'm not talking about the shape of your fingers or your arm or how you handle tablets or smartphones, but what's forming the way that you think? What's forming the way you handle hardship? What's shaping the way you see the world? All of us, to some extent or another, we've been formed, right? We are the way we are because of things in our past, but we're also constantly being shaped and being formed. We don't really have a choice. But what is in our control, like we can choose to be aware of it and be intentional about what it is that's forming us, who it is that's forming us, and what we're doing to play a part in the way that we see the world and see ourselves and see people and see trials and see difficulties. Because all of us are constantly being formed, especially, right, like it's September, and I don't know about you, but for my family, we're getting back into a routine. The summer can be a little bit crazy. There's these ups and downs. There's differences in schedules constantly. Now it's like, okay, kids are back on the bus. We're getting into a routine, and the rhythms we develop are going to shape us. So what are they? What are they? The great thing about this question is it's a question for church people, for people who follow Jesus, but it's also a question for people that aren't quite sure about God or aren't quite sure about Jesus or are quite sure that they're not into this. It's a human being thing. We're all being shaped. So the question is, what's forming you? Jesus was aware of this when he was really teaching and leading his earliest followers. He knew that they had been shaped a certain way, and if they were going to grow, they needed to be intentional about the things that were in their lives that shaped them. And so he gave them a tool that would shape the most important parts of them. The way that they saw the world, the way that they saw people, the way that they saw difficult times, the way that they saw lack. He gave them something to come back to over and over and over again. Something that was designed to be incorporated into a rhythm over and over and over again. And what we see, if you're someone who's into like church history and stuff like this, what we see is that the church at its purest form, at the time early on when it was its most attractive and influential, when it was changing the world and leveraging love for people, this tool was something that these people incorporated into their regular routines and rhythms on a consistent basis, and it changed the way that they saw the world. And so we're going to look at that tool. I'm going to show you that tool. Jesus, there's this one teaching. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. So it's a teaching on a mountain or on a hill. And it's his most famous collection of teachings. It's recorded in a few different places, but the most famous one is in what we call the Gospel of Matthew, or the good news about Jesus according to a guy named Matthew, who was actually there. And the way that Matthew compiled these teachings and the way that Jesus taught was super, super intentional. The way that it was structured was extremely purposeful. So if you look at the whole thing, it spans across a few chapters. It's broken up into 3 main parts. And in that middle part, there's 3 parts. And in the middle part of that part, there's another 3 parts. And at the center of the center of the center is this tool. It's as if the most important teaching of Jesus, right? Like this big, long Sermon on the Mount, it comes to a head at this one point. And this is the point where he gives them that thing that he wants to shape their perspective on life and people and what they value and how they see God in all of it. So you want to know what it is? You might be familiar with it. At this point, the peak, the center of the center of the center of Jesus' teaching, he says, pray like this. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. So this is it. This is the thing. Like this is the thing at the center, the center, the center. This is the thing that shaped the way Jesus' earliest followers saw the world. It changed the way they handled hardship, how they handled difficult people, how they saw their seasons of lack. It was infinitely valuable, extremely influential. Now, let me ask you a question. Is anyone familiar with this prayer? Yeah. All right, if you're like the people who were in the previous services, most people in the room had at some point prayed this prayer with these words. So here's my question. If you've prayed this prayer before, the last time you prayed it, did it work? You have to answer out loud, but really think about that. Like, this is a question I've been asking myself for several months now. Did it make a difference? Was it effective? Jesus is like, or you want to talk to God, talk to him like this, right? Like, so think about other relationships where you talk to people intentionally. Maybe you work in a place where you have meetings. Maybe you set up a certain conversation, and I bet most of the time you know why you're going into that conversation, and you walk out feeling like that went well, or that didn't, or that worked, or that didn't. And so last time you prayed this prayer, if you've done it, did it work? Was it effective? Or how about this? Let's take ourselves out of it. Let's just imagine two people, one person prays the prayer, right? And the other person doesn't. And let's say that God answers this prayer, like it works, and the other person doesn't pray the prayer. What's the difference between those two people for the rest of the day? Like, has anything happened? For a lot of us, I don't know, I don't want to speak for you, but if your story is like my story, I knew this prayer so well, right? Like the Pledge of Allegiance. Someone's doing it, you just jump right in. Where are we? You know? And it's like there's a rhythm, ba-bum, ba-bum, and you know you could do it with your eyes closed. You know it. I knew it so well, but at the same time, I didn't know it at all. At all. Like, just think about, hallowed be thy name. Like, full confession here for a long time. Thy, I never knew who thy was in reference to, right? I didn't know how to hallow a name. I didn't know how to hallow anything. What if we need more than bread? What if you don't own any land and no one's ever trespassed your situation? Like, really, what does this look like? Like, what's actually going on here? If we just step back for a second, like I said before, this was the center of the teaching that Jesus gave his followers. And he wanted it to shape them and mold them, and it did. It really worked. But for so many of us, like I said, if your story is anything like my story, these words that were supposed to be infinitely valuable have turned into, unfortunately, meaningless repetition. Like, I just do it because I do it when I'm supposed to do it, where I'm supposed to do it, and when it's over, I'm done. And I don't really know if it made a difference or not, other than feeling like, check, I said it, I did it. I was talking to somebody this week my question was, how do you feel about this prayer? Like, this is Jesus saying, here's how you talk to the Father. Like, this is the Son of God talking, saying, this is how you talk to the Father God, right? Like, how are your feelings about that? And she was like, honestly, full transparency, this for me is just how you say, I'm sorry. This is how you say I'm sorry to God. This is what I believe. Like, when I did something wrong, I would go to this prayer. I was talking to somebody else who was like, I kind of had a menu of prayers, like things that I said, and this was one of those things on the menu, and I went through it, but didn't really understand what I was saying. And so if you think about that in any other relationship, if there's a script that you follow with words that you don't understand, and that's the extent of the communication with the person on the other side of the relationship, what is that relationship going to look like? Right? Like, how deep, how healthy, how vibrant is that relationship going to be? And yet this was supposed to, and has been throughout history, something that had the ability to totally radically shape people. This is the guy, like the best guy showing people what made him so great. Right? Like, this is like if you went up to, like I said, it's the Son of God saying, this is how you talk to the Father. It's like if you were to go up to Warren Buffett, right? And be like, and he was like, when you invest like this, I'd be like, please tell me, right? Like, that's his thing, and he's showing you how he does his thing. If you were to ask Michael Jackson, right, how do you dance? And he says, when you dance like this. You'd be like, show me how to do this, right? This is this guy doing this thing. Michael Jordan, we got to get him in here. If he's like, this is how you shoot a fadeaway jump shot. I'm like, show me how to do it. This is the guy, how to do their thing. If Joanna Gaines was like, when you're going to lay out the furniture in a room and decide what colors are going to be on do it like this. How do I do it? Right? Like, this is this guy sharing his thing, and it's turned into meaningless repetition. There is so much more force. And so as we're talking about routines and rituals, The early church, the church when it was at its best, we know historically that those who followed Jesus made an effort, they made it a practice to pray this prayer 3 times a day, but they understood it. And it had this way of reorienting them. And I have an agenda, like I'll just put it out there. My hope for you, my challenge for you, and really for us as a community is to learn, at least for a few weeks, to pray this prayer 3 times a day. Just do what they did, and maybe we'll see what they saw. Allow it to change your perspective. The great thing about this prayer is that it is both. It is both. You talk about shaping, it is both a quick fix and it produces lasting change. It has the ability to just immediately reorient you and give you a new perspective when you need it, but it also has the ability to change you over time because it's hitting on some major, major things. And so over the next few weeks, what we're going to do is like look at different parts of this. But from the very beginning, we've tried to set it up to make it as easy as possible. We set up a little app reminder on our app, and you'll get sent this prayer and a little reminder to stop at the middle of the day and pray this. And maybe do it once in the morning and once at night and watch how it shapes you. But you have to at least understand the general idea of it. And so in the few minutes we have left today, I'm going to walk you through the general idea of this prayer. And I'll tell you right off the bat, I'm going to give you a different translation. And that might feel a little new, it might feel a little different, maybe even a little uncomfortable. And if it's uncomfortable, I get that, I understand that. But I'm not changing the meaning. I'm just using different words that hopefully will clarify the intention behind this, the meaning behind it. It's also not my translation. It's a translation by a group of people called that run the Bible Project. So they're way more qualified and educated than I am. So I'm not asking you to trust me. All right? But here's the idea. We're going to fly through this super fast, and hopefully you'll see the idea behind it. So Jesus starts out there. He's like, when you pray, pray like this. He's with his followers. He says, we're used to our Father who art in heaven. We could translate this, our Father who is in the skies, all right? Now, that seems a little different right off the bat, but the ancient word for heaven was their word for sky. We have heaven and earth, they had sky and land. Now, the spiritual world for them was often connected to the sky. The word for spirit was their word for wind. The idea is that you can feel it. It influences things, but you can't see it, and you can't quite wrap your arms around it, but it's there. Like the sky, it's there, but it's also kind of here, right? Like when does the sky begin? Like how high do you have to go up to be in the sky? Like a little jump, do you have to go 100 feet up? It's there, but it's also here. And so what Jesus is communicating is you have a spiritual father, which was very different for them to hear at this point. You and I have probably heard of God being referred to as Father, but in the ancient world, they did not use the word that Jesus used to address God. They would call him Adonai or something way more formal. And Jesus called him Father using an intimate term. And so right away, he's inviting his followers in. He's like, just picture this. He's like, when you pray, I want you to call God the same thing I call him. It's an invitation to intimacy, to closeness. Like this was the first point where things would have been pretty different right off the bat. And then he says, hallowed be thy name. This is part 2, line 2 of the prayer. Hallowed be thy name. That's not a phrase I've ever used in any other context. But the idea is, may your name be recognized as holy. Now, even holy is kind of one of those church words that we only use in church. But the meaning of the word holy is set apart, or different, or in a category all on its own. So if you think holy and you think like cathedral, high ceiling, dark, maybe some candles, and it's like a little cold for you, that's not the idea of holy. The idea of holy is that God is in a category all on his own. God is holy, meaning like no one cares for you the way that he cares for you. Nobody gets you the way that he gets you. Nobody knows you the way that he knows you. No one loves you the way that he loves you. You will never experience the type of love that is as intense or enduring as God's love. That's what makes it holy. And so what Jesus is saying is you start by recognizing that God wants you to feel like you're his child, close, and he cares about you like no one else does. I was trying to explain this to my daughter who's in 5th grade earlier this week. I'm trying to explain the Lord's Prayer. And you realize how much you don't know something when you're trying to explain it to a 5th grader or a 3rd grader. And I'm like, what Jesus is saying is that when you're talking to God, he wants you to feel the same way you feel when you're talking to me. Like, you can tell me whatever, and I'm not gonna scrutinize what you say, and you can just pour it out there, and think me, but 100 times better, because he's not in cranky moods like I am, and he's not gonna be annoyed with you like I am. He is in a category all on his own, and this is where you start the prayer. And if that's true, then think about this. Then logically, the next thing you would ask for is, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Meaning if you're really that good and you really care that much and you're really that interested in me, then I want to live as if you are the king. May your kingdom come here and may your will be done. This word for will, it's not like a document that you leave behind after you die. It means desire. God, if you're really that good, then I want to want what you want for me. Sometimes your kids, if you've got kids, you just want them to see things the way you see them so they'll understand why you're making them do the things that they got to do because you want them to want what you want for them. But sometimes they can't see it. And so this is where I struggle. I'm usually when I'm praying, I get stuck here where I'm okay, I know what I want, but I got to get to the point where I'm confident enough in God's goodness where I can say, okay, no, let's do it your way and almost give in to it. Right? But if this is true, then this makes sense. Then I want him to be at the wheel. If he really is that good. As it is in the skies, right? So on the land. That's the phrase, on earth as it is in heaven. As I explained this to my daughter, I was like, how do you think people treat each other in heaven? This is what Jesus is saying. We want to treat people the way that we think they treat each other, where everything is right. It's why we went out and served last week. It's why we want to be kind to people who aren't kind to us. We bring about this here. And so he says, then give us this day our daily bread. Now, if you pay attention, you might have realized at some point this is redundant. Give us this day our daily bread, right? We could translate this, our daily provision of bread, give us today. Again, it's redundant. And the reason why is because the words of Jesus are redundant in the original language. The word he uses for daily provision here, it's used only once in the entire New Testament, and it's used by him. It has the idea of relying moment by moment. So it's not just if you need a loaf of bread, throw a quick prayer up to God. It's an invitation to see God as present in your every moment. Not relying on him for the next meal, but for the next moment, the next conversation. Live in step with him today, moment by moment. And forgive us our trespasses. Or we could say, forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven those indebted to us. There are people that have taken things from me. People that have taken my joy, taken my peace, taken my plans for the day, right? I bet there are people in your life that you feel stepped in, did something they shouldn't have done, took something they shouldn't have taken. And the idea is not that that's okay, but if I'm honest with you, I've taken things from people that I shouldn't have taken, right? I've wronged people they've wronged me. It's why we use the language, I owe you an apology. You can make it up to me. Right? And the idea is not that we just pretend everything's all good all the time, but we address when we step on each other's toes and we let it go. And I need grace to be able to give grace to other people. I need to recognize my shortcomings that other people don't understand when I've got to forgive someone for their shortcoming that I don't understand. It's a new economy. And it changes the way we see people. And then this is a loaded phrase down here, but he says, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Or we could say, and don't lead us to be tested, but deliver us from the evil one. This is loaded. There's a lot going on here. But James, Jesus' brother, actually talks about this, expands on this whole idea years later. The idea, okay, to like oversimplify it, is there are things in life that are going to be hard, trials that are going to test us, where we'll see, do we actually believe what we say we believe? And the idea here is that with God's help, these really hard things can produce something good. But we need to know that there can be good that comes from this and trust God to walk us through it. Now, if we stop there for a second, I know that's a lot. It probably feels like drinking from a fire hose. I get that, right? But if we just look at a principle you could take from all of these, and these aren't perfect, but they're just one principle for each one, right? Like God is good and he's close and he cares. He's in a category all on his own. I want him at the wheel, if that's true. I have the opportunity to invite him into my every moment and trust in his goodness and provision. People are going to be tough, but if I'm honest, I'm also pretty tough. And I need to keep that in mind. And even though I'm going to face some really hard things today, tomorrow, and the next day, these things can be used for my good. Do you see how returning to those things over and over and over and over again can begin to change the way that you see the world and the people around you? Like, I don't know about you, but I wake up every morning, everyone, believing the exact opposite of everything I just said. Like, I'm in this alone. I better get control of the situation. There's not enough to go around. People are the worst, and today stinks. Thank you. But this has the ability to shape us, has the ability to change us. But it doesn't just happen. And this is really, if you're somebody, I've spoken to some of you that are like, how do I take my faith away from just Sunday and make it a thing that I believe all throughout the week? This is a great place to start. Now, you can literally repeat these words as long as you know what they mean. Or you can use it as a guide. Like in the beginning of the service, before we got into the teaching, I was up here right before the music and I prayed. I prayed this prayer. Sneaky, sneaky. I prayed it. There's a structure that I followed. It can guide you. Or you can pray it word for word. But when you do this, it will begin to shape you. And even if you're not sure about God, just imagine, like picture if these things, these ideas, what if there really is truth to them? Like how much better would life be if you believed those things? Maybe there's something to all of this. Like I said before, we tried to make it as easy as possible for you to incorporate this into your life. We have an app, and on the app, we've set it up so that you can subscribe to get notifications that remind you to do this. And when you get the notification, there'll be a page attached to it. That page has 3 translations of this prayer. There's the original one. If you're like, no, I'm old school, I'm saying the words that I learned when I was 2, then that's there. If you want the New International Version, because that's a Bible that you read, that's there. If you want this new version that was put together by a group called the Bible Project, that's there as well. There's also a song that was recently released by the Bible Project that has those exact words. For me, I have on my phone, there's an alarm that goes off at 12:30 every day, and the song just begins to play. Now, to be totally transparent, I usually snooze it right away because it's almost never a good time for a song to just go off. But on my good days, I'll get away for a minute and just listen to it. The song's literally like 1 minute and 15 seconds, and I'll take a deep breath and just like recenter and remind myself when I need to give people grace that I need grace. When it feels like there's not enough, that God abundantly provides moment by moment. When I feel like I'm alone, he's close, he's near. And those things have the ability to reshape what the next several hours are going to look like. It produces lasting change but it's also a quick fix. So you could do it 3 times a day, but you could also do it as needed. If the idea of downloading the app and enabling notifications and figuring all that scares the heck out of you, we set up a little video. If you text the word prayer to this phone number, you'll get sent the video, and it will walk you through how to do it step by step. Like I said, we've tried to make it as easy as possible. Or you just do it on your own. Set an alarm on your own, on your phone. But this is how church leaves just the Sunday thing to actually becoming a real thing that actually changes us. We're out of time, so I'm going to ask the band to come back up here. But here's what I'll leave you with. What's amazing about this is that, like I said, it shapes you. It shapes you. And you might be surprised to see when it comes up. In fact, Jesus not only prayed this prayer himself, but we see it come through the life of Jesus at multiple different times in the story. If you know the story, there's a scene just a few hours before Jesus dies. It's probably one of his hardest moments. It's when we see him at his most vulnerable. He's in a garden. He knows he's going to die, and he's praying. And he's talking to his Father. You know what he says? He says, Father, I don't want to do this, but not my will, your will be done. I trust you. And that decision changed the course of history. That's why we're here today. What if we became the kind of people that incorporated this into our routines intentionally and saw it informing the way we thought naturally over time? Like you're in a season of scarcity and you stop and can step back and remember God's abundance. You feel alone and remember that he's a Father who knows you and is near. People are tough and you remember, okay, I'm tough too. Right? Like, what if we became those kinds of people? What if we became the kind of people that turn to God, not just for lasting change, but also for those quick fixes? It would change us. It would shape us.